Welcome to another Sidebar episode. I am here with a longtime, I think by this point, longtime friend and colleague, Stephen Chu from Samford University. Steve, welcome back again. Thanks for doing this.
Always a pleasure, Garth. Great to talk to you.
Now, today we are talking about something that I wanted to talk to you about specifically. And now I think we're going public with it. And I think our teaching community, our friends and colleagues are going to enjoy this announcement. And that is that, Steve, you are coming on to an introductory psychology title with W.W. Norton. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was recruited by Sarah Grison along with Ebony Glover as another co-author. So we're going to be on the 5th edition of Psychology in Your Life. So it was Michael Gazzaniga was the co-author on it, and he's moving off. And Sarah wanted a couple of new co-authors who'd bring sort of a new and different perspective. So I was very fortunate that Sarah thought of me.
Yeah. So those are small shoes to fill, huh, Michael?
Yeah, just a bit.
Well, that's great. Now I do have some questions before we got on this call. Before we hit record, I was just talking to you I was giving you a hard time about how much stuff you do. And so I think my primary question, when I first heard this, I was excited. And then I thought, how is Steve going to do this? I know you're writing blogs, and you just told me that you are supervising 14 research projects over at Samford this semester. You have so many things going on. NITOP, I could go on and on. First of all, let's do this. Where did you find time, or where are you going to find time to do this?
Well, I mean, I've got I applied for, got a course reduction in the spring. So at least there's that, but I'm going to try and do a lot of this work in the summer, and we're going to, hopefully I'm not going to be doing 14 research projects forever and ever. It's just, this is kind of a fluke year, I'm hoping, although this is the second year I have supervised it. You can't say no to students who want to do research and they really want to do that extra step. But it's something I'm going to make time for, because it's something I've actually wanted to do for a long time. I've been interested in textbook writing, but when I was department chair, I couldn't do it because of my official duties, and so I haven't been chair for a few years, and then I do have all these other commitments. But when Sarah approached me about it, at least I realized I have some more flexibility, so I can put some things on the back burner for a while and work on this, and so hopefully I can get it through. Hopefully Sarah will not regret her choice of asking me to do this, but we'll see. I'm going to give it my best shot.
Well, I don't think she will, and I'm interested in how you historically have navigated this, because this can't be the first time somebody has maybe come to you and approached you with an idea for a writing project. So why is it different now than it has been in the past, even before you were chair?
Yeah, I have been asked a couple times, but it's just because of my structural duties as chair. I was chair for 29 years, which I don't recommend to anybody. But it just, I knew that there were just, structural responsibilities I had that I could not change. But I have been interested in doing this, so that's out of the way. And then quite specifically, working with Sarah was a great opportunity, and her vision for this book, which is it's a book that's meant to be accessible. It's not meant to be, it's meant to be both. It's meant to be balanced between kind of research and application. I'm very drawn to that vision, and I think that's kind of the sweet spot where we can convince people of both psychology's scientific status and also its value in terms of just being able to help make better decisions and things like that. And So there's that, and then I think the third factor is I've been doing this a long time, and what I've seen in general psych textbooks is when I was an undergraduate years ago, it was the big name researchers who wrote the book. So it was when I was undergraduate, Hilgard, Atkinson, and Atkinson, all three huge names, and it's been that way. And Gazzaniga is actually an example of that. But what's happened more recently is that you have people who are very rigorous psychological scientists, but who also emphasize teaching, are writing more of these books. And I think they're writing, and I think that's the teaching experience is really reflected in the book, and it changes it, makes it more equally accessible as well as rigorous. And I think the timing now is better for the kind of book that I'm really interested in writing.
So with an intro psych textbook, I think that any author who comes on board or starts a new one, they're kind of locked into some things. Certainly there's a body of content that needs to be presented. But you have some unique contributions to teaching of psychology. Are we going to see any of those, you think, within the book?
I hope so. First of all, Sarah's already kind of made it very kind of learning science oriented to the fourth edition, which is out now. And I hope to kind of continue that. So there are a number of opportunities throughout the book to kind of revisit like how, most effective ways of learning. It's already there, but I hope to kind of really kind of amp that up even more. So there's that. And then I think we're at the point now especially after the Intro Psych Initiative and the new student learning outcomes that you led that initiative. I think we're really at an opportunity where we can kind of create a textbook which really embraces that in a more comprehensive way. And when Sarah brought Ebony and I on, she was very clear that she wanted our voice in there, not just to update the references, but she was very open to how we wanted to structure the chapters. And I think after COVID, which also has changed everything, to me, the thinking and reasoning chapter, all the biases and things like that, that has become clear, the importance of recognizing one's biases and teaching people to recognize those biases and guard against them is more important than ever. And I think, so I really want to kind of try and write the book sort of with a different or embracing that new kind of way of looking at psychology that's kind of been evolving over the years.
Well, if anybody wants to hear Sarah talk about this book, if you're interested, I actually did a sidebar conversation with Sarah probably about a year ago. And she talks a lot about the uniqueness of this book and some of those emphasis that you were talking about. Now, Steve, I know you've been writing about trust a lot, student trust of teachers. Recently, you put out a trust inventory, I believe. Will we see any of those kinds of more peripheral teaching things highlighted, or maybe you haven't got there yet?
Well, I think for the trust I think that may be more in the support materials, like the instructor's manual and things like that. A lot of times the supplemental materials, they're like, here's slides, here's lecture outlines, and I think we could do a lot in terms of like especially for new instructors, thinking about creating a mindset. Trust is one of those, belonging you hear a lot about these days. And I've been doing a lot of work, or I'm starting work on curiosity, like trying to create that sense of curiosity. And actually, I've got students, the 14 projects I'm supervising, one is on curiosity and one is on trust and trigger warnings and things like that. So I think we try and build that into the book, but really that's where the teacher comes in and convinces the students that this material is important, and the book and the teacher are trustworthy sources of information, so that if the student puts in the time and effort to learn, they'll actually learn very useful and interesting and important information. So I'll try and put it in the book, but it also, I think, I'll try and help the teachers pay attention to those kinds of mindset variables.
What kinds of things have you observed in textbooks over time that you have maybe always thought to yourself, I think I'd do that differently? Or maybe just generally, how have you thought about textbooks over the course of your career?
Yeah, it's one of those cases where I think early in your career, you're just kind of looking at the textbook and making sure that you match the textbook, and after you've been doing it for quite a few years, you start thinking of like, is that the best way to present it? And you develop these, like, I like this part of the book, I do this part differently, and so at some point, I guess you have to put your money where your mouth is and say, yeah, okay, this is the way I'd write this book. But there certainly have been like issues which I would like to see like covered, in more detail or approached differently. For example, this morning I was in my general psych class, I was talking about classical conditioning, which we all teach. But oftentimes the examples stick with like, dogs and salivation and maybe a few other things, Jaws theme or and things. But what I want to convince students of is that once you start looking, you can see classical conditioning everywhere. Just where I use like logos on brands, so that there are designer logos, and I tell students like what you're doing when you're wearing a certain fashion is you're projecting a conditioned stimulus so that people will know about you, that I have this kind of priority, I have this kind of status, I fashion is a priority or not a priority to me, so I really want to try and create like a broader application. And that's why it's kind of, I was drawn to the psychology in your life, because that's exactly what this book is trying to do.
Right. Yeah. You talked about that balance, and maybe it was out of balance, the research versus the application of things. Maybe they have been a little out of balance, and it sounds like you all are trying to bring back that application. But it makes me wonder, like, are you, and I know it's not, you don't get to make all the decisions at this point, but are you willing to let go of the, some of the history, because those old examples, like the dog, the Pavlov's dog example, you let go of that, you let go of some history of psych too, right? Where do you come out on that?
Well, we've actually talked about this very issue, and we've talked a possible solution to this, and it's way too early days to talk about it, but exactly what you talk about. If we focus on the contemporary, we give up some of the discussion of the history, but we know we have to talk more about like psychology as a diverse field. It's already actually, Sarah's very intentionally put it in the fourth edition, and we're going to expand on that in the fifth edition. But we want that balance of what psychology was and how we got here, but we want to talk about where it is now, and talk about some of the exciting young researchers who don't reflect the traditional roots necessarily, but are bringing a whole new exciting perspective and research emphasis that we haven't had before. So we're definitely very intentionally trying to balance out those two things.
That is so interesting. I've been reading an author, former Harvard faculty. His name's Todd Rose, and he studies the science of individualism, and which I've never really seen. But I think there's a lot of new research out there that we really haven't seen, really niche stuff, very interesting stuff. But how do you put more content into an already dense introductory psychology book, right? Something has to give, something has to go.
No, and I think that's going to be a real challenge. But you just have to understand. I mean, and I think maybe this is where I've come with a teacher where early in your career, it's like, well, I've got to mention this. I've got to mention this. Whereas after a while, you realize, well, students can only retain so much. And, all you can do is you give them the things that you think are critical because you're the professor. Your course reflects your priorities, but you always have to leave them, curious to learn more, and with the understanding that there's a lot more richness out there that they should explore. And we should model that. Just like you're still reading and still developing intellectually, we need to model that as well for our students. But yeah, it's if we all wrote the book that had everything in it, it would be an 800-page, volume 1.
Right?
How many volumes? But yeah, you realize that you've got to. You've got to really pick and choose because students are not going to be able to take in everything. They're not going to take in one semester what you've spent your entire career, developing.
I was just hanging out this summer with Ludi Benjamin of History of Psychology fame, and then we also have some friends in common, like the Barney Bynes and the Ken Keiths, who teach those kinds of courses. Other folks, lots of other folks out there teach them. And so I'm going to say this knowing that there's a part of me that really respects the history of psychology and what those folks have brought to us and how they value and show us how to value it. But at the same time, I wonder what an introductory psychology course or textbook could look like if we weren't tied to that, if we could just let them go and really go for the application and the more modern contemporary things. I know that publishers, they get feedback from professors and they need to write a textbook and they need to present a textbook that people will actually use. So I think it becomes a little bit of a trap. Have you experienced any of that, or have you heard about any of that?
No, absolutely. This is an ongoing struggle. And first of all, I really enjoyed your discussion with Ben. There's kind of a backstory there I'll tell you about at some point. But anyway, yeah, it is a struggle. And at NITOP a few years ago, Nora Newcomb made a very compelling argument that we were so far beyond Piaget that we shouldn't be teaching Piaget anymore. And I think that's a very logical argument to make from just a research point of view. But from a teaching point of view, I am reluctant about that because Piaget it's very intuitive, it's very understandable, and it's actually more advanced than what people typically know about child development. So as a teacher, you need to recognize, what's a level of understanding that is more advanced than what they have, that they can actually master in the semester that I've got them. And I think Piaget kind of fills that bill. So I still teach Piaget because it's a framework that is more advanced than what they've got. And I just, I talked about the critiques of Piaget and that we've gone beyond that, but I still teach that. So I do think the historical precedent plays a role, and also, as we've seen in recent years, we should not ignore our mistakes that we've made that have held the field back or held certain people back in the field. And so we can't forget our history and act as if we've always been this way. So there is that balance to be met. But for example, in the memory chapter, you'll always see the sensory memory, short-term or working memory, and long-term memory. And I wrote an article for that and in the Teaching Professor, and I said, this model hasn't been valid in 50 years. And the editor was just like, what? It's because you still see it all the time. And I said, well, but it's still useful because it's more advanced than what most people think about in terms of memory, and it's useful, but it's just not up to date. I'm not going to teach them people up to date stuff that they don't understand. I'm going to teach them stuff that they can understand that's more advanced than what they have, currently.
So it is always in the last, I'd say the last decade or so, you see the Piaget stuff, or what we're talking about. You see these theories that maybe aren't well supported anymore. So we spend some time kind of outlining those theories, and then in the next section, it kind of is critical of the theory and tells you what its shortcomings are. And that has always driven me crazy until I just heard your answer, which is a very interesting one. I've not heard somebody give that answer before, that it's better than what they've got. And what can you act in an introductory psychology course? What can you give to students in 3 days or 2 days covering developmental psychology? Yeah, it's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, and in my cognitive class, I take a historical perspective, and we start with verbal learning and Ebbinghaus, and then we go to information processing, and we go on to levels of processing. And at the end, students go, this was a course about being wrong. So like here's the theory. It did certain things well, but it ultimately was wrong, and it got replaced by this more sophisticated theory, but it turned out to be wrong. So, it's just like we're going through this series of models which capture more and more, aspects of memory, but ultimately they're wrong. And that's kind of the nature of science. So,
right. Well, you talked about the student learning outcomes from IPI. That is the first theme, is exactly. that illustrates the scientific method and how it's humble and it can change over time. And yeah, I like that. And I think we can all agree that skills is taking its rightful place in the psychology curriculum, and it's not all content dependent. In fact, you're about to give a talk. I don't want to date this, but you're about to give a talk about what students should know 5 years after they take an introductory psychology course, which I'm really interested in hearing. But I think one of those things that maybe even our other colleagues have studied is that the content they don't remember so much, but we can really double down on the skills.
I think so, and that's thank you. You can write. Now you can do the talk for me, and so, but yeah, skills. And the funny thing is, they may remember the skills, but they may not remember they learned them in our class. So they may not remember our class in particular, but because skills are implicit, they're automatic. But I think, to me, and this is something I've thought about a long time. What students should take away from this is like a higher level demand for proof of what it means to understand or explain something. Because if someone, I want a student 5 years from now to say for someone to give them an intuitive but not supported answer, and my student to go, it can't be that simple, or I just don't think the evidence is there. Now, they're not going to remember they learned that from me, or hopefully they learned it from multiple, courses. But that I think is an important outcome where the student just says, I'm not satisfied with the level of evidence that you've presented, me with, and they, and that skepticism, that demand for evidence over a lifetime, I think, will make a big difference in the quality of their decisions.
Well, I love that you are going to bring that lens to an introductory psychology textbook. I think you guys have a dynamite team. I think Sarah's book was already great. I got to give some feedback a little while ago, a couple of years ago, actually, and I was really impressed with the direction that she went on it. And now to have these new co-authors involved, I think is really incredible. So, Steve, is there anything else that you just want to share when you're thinking about this book? I just don't want to forget anything, but I know that this is kind of the first announcement publicly, I think, about this book coming out with new co-authors.
Yeah, I'm just very excited to be on board and to work with Sarah and Ebony Glover, the other co-author, and we've already met a couple of times, and I think we have a great chemistry. It's a very supportive team, so I'm just excited about the possibility and eager to get working on it.
Fantastic. Well, it's always nice to talk to you, Steve. Thanks for taking the time to talk about psychology in your life. And that is coming, well, I'd say soon, but textbook take a while to come out. So what are we looking at? 2025?
At the earliest, 2025. I think that is the target date. Yeah.
All right, Steve. Well, thanks for your time today.
All right. Thank you, Garth. I shouldn't probably have mentioned the backstory with Ben, but it just reminded me. I met him a few times. I don't know him real well, but we've always got along really well. But I didn't know that he was a University of Texas graduate and undergraduate, and I am too.
Yeah.
And he mentioned in your conversation that he had this new professor there named Clark Burnham, and Clark Burnham was my advisor also when I was there. But he was towards the end of his career then, but he still is a really nice guy. And I'm still planning on emailing Ben and just kind of touching base with him and just saying, yeah, I knew Clark Burnham, and we probably knew a few other people in common back there who were there, who spanned the time between, I don't know exactly what years Ben was there, and I was there, but anyway, but yeah, I just really, I'm glad you and Jane were able to convince him to record the session.
We had to chase him for years to get that done. We had to sick Jane on him. I'm sure. Yeah, Jane would probably cornered him eventually. Yeah, even that in that way, it took a while.